How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're on Daf Tzadiyeh, Daf 95 of Masechta BavaBasra. Friends. So for the first part of today's daf, we're going to continue with yesterday's discussion of, that we had the, what are we talking about? Givaldik, see, right, okay, fine. So we're going to continue with yesterday's discussion about basically when you sell stuff and stuff is included, and then we're going to then get into the discussion about wine and what's acceptable in terms of wine. Nice and vague. Fine. So now we're going to start. So yesterday, what time is it? It's 10 minutes to 6 in the morning. So I've got coffee over here. Hopefully my brain is turned on enough. So yesterday we saw this Gevaldige Mishnah that, when you buy, grain, okay, so it's assumed that 1/24th of that 1/24th or a quarter kav per sa'a will be from other things. We have people outside, Baruch Hashem, 10 to 6 in the morning. We have people outside making noise, but I got my noise canceling headphones, so hopefully they won't penetrate too much. So 1/24th, a rova kav can be of under zachen. So, for example, if you're buying wheat and you have a rova of legumes, so that is okay. More than that is not okay. So then the shaila is, what if there is more than that? So we saw the opinion of Rav Huna, who says that, well, if it turns out that there's more than what's allowed, more than the threshold that's allowed, so you push it, have to remove all of it. You don't just scale it back to within the threshold, you remove all of the unwanted matter. Okay, so if you're buying wheat and there's more than a rova of legumes, so then you remove all the legumes, not just enough to scale it back to within a rova. All right. So then we were bringing supports and anti-supports back and forth for Rav Huna, and we're going to we stopped kind of in the middle of that, so we're going to pick up from there, and that's going to be the first part of today's daf. All right, shtickle coffee. So we're going to start on daf Tzadidal Amud Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. Tashmat, come in here. The Tani Ravin bar Rav Nachman taught. Loy es ha moser bilvad hu machzir elo machzir lo es kol harevoin kulon al mecha de boya adure kula mehader. Okay, so this, I assume this is probably from Perek Beis Kor. It's from Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. Yeah, Perek Beis Kor. So I guess that we're going to get into this in about a week or so. But okay, so if a fellow sells like a base core, so I'm not an expert yet. Well, I'll probably understand it a little bit better in about a week from now. I'll go upon him. If somebody sells a base core, which is 30 sa'as, well, a core is 30 sa'a. Okay, and I don't know how big is a base core, because a base sa'a is 50 amas by 50 amas, just 2,500 square amas. Now, if a sa'a is 30 amas, then is that 1,500 by 1,500? That's a humongous space. Hakaponim. So if you're selling a base core, Hakaponim. So if you're selling, I guess it's not a huge space. 1,500 amas. It's 1,500. It's not a small space, but 1,500 times 1,500 though is like a lot. That's like millions, right? I did it yesterday. I think it was like millions of amas, right? Is it not? 50? No, 1 second. 50 times 30 is 1,500, right? So 1,500 times 1,500. Wait, let me quickly do 1 second. 50 times 30 is 1,500. And if you do 1,500 times 1,500, that's 2,250,000. That's a lot. Akaponim. So, anyways, so I don't know though. But anyway, so if you're selling a base course, so you got to sell the base course. The interesting thing is that, so if you sell a base core, it's literally a base core. But if he says, Hein Chaser and Yasser, right? I think that's the Lashon. If he says, yeah, Hein Chaser and Yasser, more or less, so then there could be wiggle room of a quarter, of a rova. So the shaila is, what if it's more or less than a rova? So we're saying that, well, in that case, it all goes back. So this seems to be a support for Rav Huna, who says that when it's more than a rova by the wheat and the legumes, it all goes back. So here also we're saying by the base core, it all goes back. So again, Tashma, the Tani Ravin by Rav Nachman, Loi esa moser bilvadu machzir. So when it comes to selling, if Shimon's selling Reuven a base core, and there is a difference of more than a rova, so then he doesn't just return the rova, ela machzilo as kola ruva and kulon, he returns everything be'etzim. So so we see that once already you have to return, you return everything. But the Gemara points out an important difference, which is that over there by the base core, by default, it's literally a base core. If he specifically says Hein Chaser and Yasser, whether it's more, whether it's less, okay, so then there's wiggle room of up to a rova. But by default, there's no wiggle room at all. So I can understand why in that case, where by default there's no wiggle room at all. If you say in Chaser and Yasser, okay, Beseder, so then it's up to a quarter. But if it's more than a quarter, forget about it. So also in Chaser and Yasser, Amalei, that over there, Davka, he said in Chaser and Yasser, and that is why there is even wiggle room up to a quarter, up to a rova. Because, right, meaning up to a quarter kav per sa'ah, times 30 of the base core. So that's what allows, but by default, there's no wiggle room whatsoever. And then we say that if you pass that threshold, so then you got to return everything. So mi revia lo chashiv, yosem revia chashiv. Right? So once he says in chaser and yosser that I'm selling you a base core more or less, well then we say, okay, fine. So more or less could be up to a revia. Fine. You could skip actually the next revia chashiv. Skip until v'hadra. Right? What was Aleph? Skip all that stuff, right? The chayvon until ba'pinafsha. Yeah. So let's skip it. So revia lo chashiv, yosem revia chashiv v'hadra. If it's more than a revia, so then it's considered too significant, and all of it then goes back to the default, which is no wiggle room. But by the wheat and the legumes, where by default there is wiggle room, it's assumed that there's going to be other things mixed into it to a certain extent, well then, I might argue that if it's more than a revia, just scale it back to be a revia or less. I'm going to drink a shtick of coffee. Tashma coming here. Ha'oinoya pochis mishtus. So when it comes to ona, as we know from Perek Azov and Bav Metzia, pochis mishtus. So if if the difference in price is less than a sixth nikne mekach, so the sale is valid and final. No, nothing's given back. Yoser mishtos, if the discrepancy in price is more than a sixth, so batul mekach, so then the entire sale is null and void and everything returns. Shtus, and if it's a sixth, kana umachzir onaa, so then the sale is valid, but the onaa must be returned. But Amai, why are we saying that when it is a sixth or more, all of it goes back? Why not just scale it back so that it's less than a sixth, that's within the threshold of what's allowed? Lihadar ad pachos mishtus, just scale it back till it's within a sixth, less than a sixth. So we see, like Rav Huna, that whenever it crosses the threshold and now must be returned, it's entirely returned. We say no, again, there's a difference there, because really me'ikar adin, the sale was meant to be at face value. That's what the sale was meant to be, at face value. At face value. At face value. But as long as it's less than a sixth, it's not really noticeable, discernible. And therefore, a person is mocha less than a shtus. Shtus yediyah v'lo mocha linish. Once it's a sixth, there's a discrepancy of a sixth, then already it's discernible. And we say, wait a second, we were talking about face value over here. Let's do face value. Yosem mishtus mekachtosu uvato. And if it's more than a sixth, then it's a mekach tos bichlal, and it's null and void. Uvato mekach. But over here, there's an assumption by the wheat and the legumes. There's an assumption that there's going to be legumes in there, and therefore it's a different story. I might argue that just scale it back to within the threshold. Tashma kamanir. Hamakabel sada mechavero lita. So if Shimon owns a field and Reuven is going to work it, he's going to plant trees and things like that. So he plants 100 trees. So it's understood that of the 100 trees, 10 are going to be duds. 10 are not going to produce. Okay, so Beseder. So if Reuven plants 100 trees, 10 of them are duds. Okay, Beseder. Yoser Mikan, but if there are 11 duds, Migalgalin Olav Esakol, so that means that Reuven is responsible to replant all 11, not just to replant one of them so that it's back to the permissible threshold of 10 duds per 100. No, he's got to replant all of them. Sounds like Rav Huna. Rav Huna breder of Yoshua, but it says Rav Huna breder of Yoshua called Yoser Mikan. No, the difference is that when it comes to the field, if there are 11, the point is that when there are 10 duds per 100, that's insignificant. But 11 duds, that's already an important piece of property on its own right. And therefore, because it's so significant, it's like Reuven didn't do his mission. His mission was to plant Shimon's field. He planted only 89 out of 100 potential trees. There's 11 trees that are duds. It's a whole sort of piece of property on its own right, and therefore he didn't really plant the whole property. There's a major gap there. So therefore he needs to, there's a whole property that needs planting. Anything less than that, it'll be like, just replanting one of the 11 would be like a minority of this leftover property. So therefore, because 11 trees worth is considered like a significant property in its own right, that's why he needs to plant this property, and therefore he needs to plant all of it. But when it comes to the wheat and the legumes, where it's not as significant in that sense, where if it's more than a rova, it's not like his own property, so maybe scaling back to within the threshold would be okay. Okay, so it sounds like we didn't necessarily succeed in like proving or disproving Rav Huna per se. Okay, but that was the opinion of Rav Huna, that if you gotta, if you cross the threshold, you gotta go all the way over. All right. So now we get up to what the Mishnah had said, that Martev. What's the lashon is actually important. Martev shel yoyin mekabel olav eser kosesos lemeya. So if Shimon is selling Reuven a seller of wine, so then Reuven accepts that if it's 100 barrels, that 10 of them are going to be duds. Now, as I said a second ago, what Shimon is selling to Reuven, what he says that is for sale is important. Depends how Shimon describes what he's selling to Reuven. Here we go. So martev shel yoyin v'chulei hechi dami. Ida amar le martev shel yoyin stam kashi. Da amar le martev zeh shel yoyin kashi. Da amar le martev zeh kasha. So there's three possibilities of what Shimon could have said to Reuven. one possibility is, I'm selling you a cellar of wine. A cellar of wine. The other possibility, I'm selling you this cellar of wine. Another possibility, I'm selling you this cellar. Okay, a cellar of wine, this cellar of wine, a cellar. Oh no, or even, I think even this cellar, right? This cellar. Again, a cellar of wine, this cellar of wine, this cellar. Those are three possibilities of what Shimon could have said that he's selling to Reuven. And each one will have different nafkaminas of what exactly the expectation is that Shimon delivers. So again, Echidami, what exactly is Shimon saying to Reuven? If Shimon says to Reuven, Martev shel yoyin stam kasha. If he says, I'm selling you a cellar of wine, well, we're gonna have issues with that. Martev zeh shel yoyin kasha. And if Shimon says to Reuven, this cellar of wine, oichet, we have problems. If Shimon says to Reuven, this cellar, but doesn't say anything about wine, oichet kasha. Ditani, because we learn in a price, martiv shel yoyin ani mochelach, because if Shimon were to say to Reuven, I'm selling you a cellar of wine, no saying lo, yain shekulo yafe. Shimon must deliver 100% Givaldige wine. No duds. 100 barrels of awesomeness. There's no duds allowed. And if Shimon says to Reuven, I'm selling you this cellar of wine, no sin lo yain animka b'chanus. Interesting. Shimon must only deliver wine that's sold in a store, supermarket wine. What kind of wine? If you want to buy good wine, so you go to a wine shop. You can go to any random supermarket. I think in the United States, it's been my experience. I haven't gone to that many random supermarkets in the middle of nowhere. But when I have, there's like a kosher section, and you can usually find a basic bottle of wine. So now. I would even say that those bottle of wines that you would find in the random supermarket in any town, USA, it would probably be a little bit better than what we're talking about. We're talking about, you go to, I guess, a supermarket 1,500 years ago, whatever the equivalent was, and there's there's wine over there sitting in the supermarket. It's not going to be the best quality. We're going to learn about it more tomorrow. It's maybe on its way out. It's not vinegar, it's wine. But, it's not great. Just kind of describing, setting the sort of baseline for what we're talking about when we're talking about yanin kabachonus. And when I say supermarket wine, it's like, on its way out wine. Okay, supermarket. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about supermarket wine. So if he says yain martev zeh shel yoyin, he says this wine cellar. So we're talking about supermarket wine. Okay. Martev zeh ani mochelach, and if Shimon simply says to Reuven, I'm selling you this cellar, doesn't even say anything about wine. Well then, Reuven, you got no claims against Shimon for wine. You didn't say anything about wine. Afilu kulo chometz igio. Even if it's all vinegar, Beseder, Shimon never promised anything about wine. So neither one of those three options, did the Brisa say that Shimon must deliver 90% awesome, 10% duds. It's either 100% awesome, 100% supermarket wine, or no wine at all. There was no 90% awesome, 10% duds. That didn't exist in the Brisa. So, and for the Gemara, Le'olam, really I will say that our Mishnah is talking about the first example in the Brisa, that he says, I'm selling you a cellar of wine. Now the Brisa had said that Shimon must deliver 100% awesome wine. Utni bereisha, but teach at the beginning of the Brisa, the Brisa umakabel olav eser kosasos lemea, and that Reuven accepts the fact that 10% will be duds. Okay, fine. So you have to amend the Brisa shtickle that when it says a wine cellar, it doesn't mean 100% awesome sauce. It means 90% awesome sauce, 10% duds. So now frek the Gemara, uvistam mi mekabel? Ho. Is that really so? That if Shimon says to Reuven, hey Reuven, I'm going to sell you martev shel yoyin, does Reuven really accept that 10 are going to be duds? V'atani Reb Chiya taught, if Shimon sells a barrel of wine to Reuven, nosin lo yain shekulo yafe. Shimon must deliver a barrel of wine that is 100% awesome sauce. Shiny chav is the chule charchamahu. Well, one second, you're talking about one barrel of wine. All of the wine in that one barrel is either going to be awesome sauce or not. So we're saying if you're selling them one barrel of wine, that barrel of wine needs to be good. But here we're talking about 100 barrels of wine. So that's a different thing. So we're saying, 10 of them could be duds, 90% of them, awesome sauce. But Reb Zvid taught from the Besmedrash Reb Oshaya, and here we go, this is going to be important. Martev shel yoyin is going to take us to the end of the daf, whatever. Let's go weiter. Martev shel yoyin ani mochilach. So if he says, I'm selling you a cellar of wine, yes, so what do we say? Nosin lo yain shekulo yafe. 100% awesome sauce. Martev zeh shel yoyin ani mochilach. This wine cellar, so we had said before that this wine cellar is supermarket wine. But no. Nosin lo yayin shekulo yafe umekabel olav eser kosesos lemeya. That when it says yayin zeh, martev zeh shel yayin, it is 90% awesome sauce, 10% duds. And that is one second. Okay, okay, fine. And therefore, in our Mishnah, when it's talking about Martev Shel Yoyin, what did it say? Martev Shel Yoyin, yeah, okay. So when it says Martev Shel Yoyin, it's talking about Martev Zeh Shel Yoyin, and it's talking about, and that's 90% awesome sauce, 10% duds. One second, just checking something. Okay, great. 90% awesome sauce, 10% duds. Gewaldig. So the Brisa that Rav Zvid just quoted says that if you say a wine cellar, it's 100% awesome sauce. If you say this wine cellar, 90% awesome sauce, 10% duds, and that's what our Mishnah is talking about. So Elamas Nisanami Domer Le Zeh. Okay, so therefore our Mishnah is talking about where he says Martev Zeh Shel Yoyin, and therefore it's 90% awesome sauce, 10% duds. Ela, so Kasha Zeh Azeh. But as maybe you're thinking, but one second, we had a Brisa which says that when he says Martev Zeh Shel Yoyin, we're talking about supermarket wine. And now Rav Zvid's quoting us a Brisa that is saying Martev Zeh Shel Yoyin is 90% awesome sauce, 10% duds. So what's the deal with the discrepancy? We're saying that that's what our Mishnah is talking about when he says Martev Zeh. So what's pshat? The same lashon seems to have two different implications. Lo kashas, no problem. Odo amarle lemikba, odo lo amarle lemikba. Aha. Well, it depends if Shimon says to Reuven, or if the agreement is that it's for cooking. The Rav Zvid, the amarle lemikba, that in Rav Zvid's brisa, when he says Martev Zeh Shel Yoyin, and we're saying it's 90% awesome sauce, 10% duds, that's for cooking. Because, right, the rule is, right, cook with the same wine that you drink. So therefore, it has to be awesome sauce wine if it's for cooking. Brisa, but the initial brisa where it says that Martev Zeh Shel Yoyin is simply supermarket wine. De lo amar le mikba, you didn't say that they didn't stipulate that it's for cooking, and therefore it could be just whatever you need. Epis, you need some wine right now, so supermarket wine will do. Okay, so hilkach. Okay, so therefore let's go weiter. We're gonna kind of break things down now. Martev Shel Yoyin v'amar le mikba. So if the deal is for a wine cellar, and he says that it is for cooking, a wine cellar for cooking, well then it's going to have to be 100% pure, awesome sauce. Nosin lo yain shikul yafe, 100% pure, awesome sauce. Martev Zeh Shel Yoyin. Okay, when we're talking about Martev Zeh Shel Yoyin, so then we're saying it depends. If he says that it's for cooking, well, nosin lo yain shikul yafim mekabel all of eser kosos lemeir. So then he provides. Then it has to be 90% awesome sauce wine and 10% duds. Martev Zeh Shel Yoyin v'lo amar lemikba. And if he says Martev Zeh Shel Yoyin, but he doesn't specify for cooking, well then, nosin lo yain im kabachonos, we're talking about supermarket wine. And of course, if he says Martev Zeh, so then he doesn't say anything about wine, it could just be vinegar. The only shaila, that's the case that we didn't talk about, is what if he says Martev Shel Yoyin, he doesn't say Zeh, and he also doesn't specify cooking. What is the expectation there? If he says Martev Shel Yoyin, and he does not say Zeh, and he does not specify that it's for cooking, do we say that in that case it's 100% awesome sauce wine? Or do we say it's 90% awesome sauce wine and 10% duds? This is the question that they ask. The same question I just asked. If he says a cellar of wine, and he does not say that it is for cooking. What's the halacha? I think that we say that whenever there's a machlokes Rav Acha and Ravina, we always paskin like one of them. I think it's Ravina, but it might be Rav Acha. But I think it's Ravina, but it might be Rav Acha. Chad Omar Mikabel v'Chad Omar Lo Mikabel. So one opinion is that when it's a wine cellar and no mention of cooking, one opinion is that Reuven accepts 10% duds, and the other one is no, it must be 100% awesome sauce wine. Man de Omar Mikabel. So according to the Man de Omar, who says that Reuven accepts 10% duds, diek midurav zvid, because we're medaik from zvid dikatani, because Rav Zvid taught Martev Shel Yoyin ani mocher loch nosin lo yain shikulo yofe, that Rav Zvid in his brisa said that if the deal is for a wine cellar, so then it needs, I mean, it doesn't say this, but he says a wine cellar, so then it needs to be 100% awesome sauce wine. But we had established that brisa is dafka lemikba. So time of the Amar Mikba, that's specifically because it's for cooking. But if it's not for cooking, mikabel, so then Reuven accepts that 10% is going to be duds, even though it's simply a wine cellar. And according to the opinion who says that it must be 100% awesome sauce wine, diek mi brisa. He's medayik from the initial brisa, the katani that it says, Martev Shel Yoyin ani mocher loch nosin lo yain shkul yafe. The initial brisa had said that if he's simply selling a wine cellar, so then it's 100% awesome sauce wine. V'ukimna de lo amar le mikba. And in that brisa is talking about where it's not for cooking, and we're saying that it still must be 100% awesome sauce wine. So the man didayik midurav zvid kasha brisa. Okay, so now we got to look at each of these opinions, because starting with The man the Amr who holds like, where am I? Where am I? Uluman the Daik midu Rav Zvid. So according to the opinion who's Medaik from Rav Zvid, that when we say 100% awesome sauce is specifically when it's for cooking, but when it's not for cooking, only 90% awesome sauce. So kasha brisa. Then what about the fact that the brisa is saying it's 100% awesome sauce when it's not for cooking? So well, the brisa we have to massage the brisa a shtickle and amend it. When do we say 100% awesome sauce? To amar leile mikbah. If it's for cooking, or lo amar leile mikbah. But if it's not for cooking, mikabel, well then Ruvain would accept 10% duds. Umartev ze shel yoyin. And when it comes to this wine cellar, v'lo amar leile mikbah, and there's no mention of cooking, nosin lo yain nimkar bechonos, then it's just going to be supermarket wine. Uluman dedaik mi brisa. According to the opinion who's medaik from the brisa, that it's 100% awesome sauce even when he does not mention mikbah. Kasha to Rav Zvid. What does it do with Rav Zvid, who is medayik from his brisa, which is talking about mikbah, and it says 100% awesome sauce, implying that when it's not lemikbah, it's only 90% awesome sauce. Do kimna to amar le lemikbah, that Rav Zvid says that dafka when it's for cooking, it's 100% awesome sauce. Halo amar le lemikbah, but if it's not for cooking, mikabel, so then you would have to accept 10% duds. Hu adin dafagav de lo amar le lemikbah. So even if they don't specify cooking, still it would be 100% awesome sauce. Lo makabel, he doesn't accept 10% duds. By do kimna to amar le mikbah, and when we say that Rav Zvid's brisa is talking about for cooking, mishum dekasha ze azeh, that's only for when he says zeh, because the first brisa said when he says zeh, it's supermarket wine. The second brisa says when he says zeh, it's 90% awesome sauce, 10% duds. What do we do with that discrepancy? So for that discrepancy, we had to explain that one's le mikbah, one's not for mikbah. But when it comes to martev shel yoyin, I'm selling you a wine cellar. There was no discrepancy between the two brises. In both of the brises, it said the same thing, 100% awesome sauce. So we don't need to make any distinction about cooking there. Givaldi. We're going to stop here. We're going to pick up from here tomorrow. Givaldig. So yeah, Daf Tzadiyeh, we kind of finished up with the discussion of Rav Huna from yesterday about when there's more than a rova of legumes. Rav Huna said you have to give it all back. We kind of brought some more cases, try to prove for or against. And then we got into the wine, that, right, 90% awesome sauce, 10% duds. We kind of figure out in what cases that would be the case. Peace out.